Audiobook Introduction, Crimson Ash, The Eye of Perun, a novel by Anna Gogoleva, copyright 2026. There is a fear that lives in the oldest part of the human mind. It is not the fear of death. It is not the fear of pain. It is the fear of the other. The thing that lurks just beyond the firelight, the shape that moves in the corner of your vision, the whisper that speaks your name in a voice that is almost, but not quite, your own. Our ancestors knew this fear. They gave it a name. They called it dragons. But they were wrong. Dragons are not lizards. They are not beasts. They are not creatures of scale and claw. Dragons are thoughts. Ancient, hungry thoughts, born from the darkest impulses of the human heart. They feed on hatred. They grow fat on fear. And they have been waiting, for 1,000 years, for the moment when we would forget how to love. This is the story of that moment. It begins in the bogs of northern Russia, where a young healer named Masha discovers that her brother has been stolen by forces beyond her comprehension. It takes her across the threshold of the world, into a realm of floating islands and inverted trees, where dragons war for the very fabric of reality. It asks the question that has haunted humanity since we first learned to speak. Can love seal the gates of hell? Masha believes it can. She walks through salt marshes that burn her feet. She faces a three-moored beast that speaks with the voice of 1,000 years of cruelty. She sacrifices her hair, her hope, and almost her very soul, to close a door that should never have been opened. But the door is opening again. In the year 2026, archaeologists dig up a warning that was buried 1,000 years ago. They laugh at it. They dismiss it as folklore. And while they laugh, the seal cracks, the black thorn blooms, and the dragons come not from the sky, but from within. From every act of hatred, every word of violence, every moment of indifference that we have poured into the world like poison. This is a book of warnings. This is a book of prayers. This is a book that asks you to remember the old ways, the rituals, the incantations, the quiet acts of love that keep the darkness at bay. And it is a book that begs you to ask yourself, when the scales tip, and they will, which side will you feed? My name is Anna Gogoleva. I wrote this story in the summer of 2026, in the region where my grandmother told me her tales of the forest. I did not write it to frighten you. I wrote it to wake you. The dragons are not coming. They are already here. They live in the comments section, in the news broadcasts, in the bitter arguments that tear families apart. They live in the loneliness of a generation that has forgotten how to touch, how to listen, how to hold each other in the dark. But there is still a choice. There is always a choice. And that choice is yours. You are listening to Crimson Ash, the complete audiobook, now available exclusively on the YouTube channel Fantasy and Thriller Audiobooks by Anna Gogoleva. If you have been moved by this story, if you have felt the cold touch of the salt marshes, if you have wept with Masha at the gate, if you have looked into the mirror and seen the flicker of a vertical pupil, then subscribe. Subscribe to the channel Fantasy and Thriller Audiobooks by Anna Gogoleva, where the old stories live. Subscribe to the place where the fires are still lit, where the words are still spoken, where the dragons are remembered not as monsters, but as warnings. Subscribe and become part of a community that believes love is stronger than fear, that sacrifice is never in vain, and that the door, no matter how cracked, can still be sealed. Because the gate is waking, and we need all the light we can find. Thank you for listening. Now, turn the page. Crimson Ash. Prologue. The Bogs of Vologda Oblast, 2026. The heat was unbearable. The kind that only comes at the end of July, when the air feels thick and sticky, and the bog does not smell of mud, but of rotting hay, heavy and sweet. The archaeological team from Moscow State University had been digging in this accursed place for 3 weeks now, turning up nothing but roots and shards of worthless pottery. Professor Nikitin, the head of the expedition, had begun to mutter about packing up and going home, when a female student, tripping over a hummock, fell flat on her face and came nose to nose with a flat boulder, its surface covered with strange hollows that looked like the footprints of a gigantic bird. "A trail stone," Nikitin breathed, approaching. "Look at the shape. Water polished, but the depressions are too deep." "There's a void beneath it," the student replied, wiping sweat and mud from her face. She was no longer thinking about her thesis. She felt a strange, pressing chill emanating from the stone, even though the sun was blazing. When the shovels touched the earth beneath the boulder, the unexpected happened. The soil gave way almost soundlessly, revealing a small, perfectly circular dugout. Inside, there was no rot, no bones, only a clay ampule, sealed with wax, that still bore the faint imprint of a symbol, a 6-spoked wheel. Inside was a birch bark scroll. The letters were strange, half erased, but when the lab technician aimed a spectrograph at it, the script came into sharp focus. Nikitin read it aloud, and his voice wavered. "If the human race tips the scales of abomination, the gates of the Alatia stone shall open, and the judgment fire shall come, not upon the flesh, but upon the thoughts." At that very moment, the instruments in the tent howled like wounded beasts. The electromagnetic needle lurched into the red zone. One of the senior lab assistants, a burly man with a neck like a bear's, clutched his head and began to wail. "Masha, Masha, don't go! Don't give him up!" He thrashed in hysterics, repeating the same name, while 3 colleagues held him down. No one knew any Masha. An hour later, he calmed down, but his eyes remained glassy and vacant. Nikitin stared at the birch bark, and deep inside him, against all reason, a conviction took root. This was not an ancient artifact. It was a message from the future, waiting 1,000 years for its hour. And that hour had come. Part 1. The Troubles. Chapter 1. Dry Forest. The tiger breathed heavily. It breathed like a cornered beast hiding in its den. Every movement, every gust of wind felt superfluous, a violation of an ancient peace. Maria, or simply Masha as the villagers called her, walked along the edge of the bog, carrying a birch bark pail. She knew that to take the true route of the weeping grass, you must walk in silence. A word is a track, and a track in this forest attracts more than just beasts. She counted her steps. 117. 118. On the 19th, she stopped at an old fire pit, left, it seemed, long before her birth. In the grass, in the rich ash that sank its roots toward the underworld, thin green arrows of weeping grass leaves thrust upward. Masha knelt. The clay beneath her fingers was wet and smelled not of earth, but of iron. She did not recite the Our Father. For that she would have needed a priest, and the priest came to their village only once a year, to collect his tithe and ride back to the city. Masha knew another word, as old as the forest itself. She whispered it, exhaling her breath into the roots without letting her lips touch them. "Weeping grass, your mother is the earth. By your power I lock the gates. I bar the stranger. I keep my own." Her fingers slid into the soil, and the root came easily, as if agreeing, as if the earth itself surrendered it to her hand. But when Masha stood up, something had changed. The air was no longer just heavy, it was angry. The leaves on the neighbouring birches trembled, not from the wind, but from some inner shudder, and all at once the birds for miles around fell silent. Masha froze. A flutter of unease stirred within her. Her brother, Ulysses, had gone into the forest before dawn. He had said he had found a new bee tree where the honey would surely be as sweet as dreams. He was always looking for honey. He loved sweet things like a child. Though he was already 12, he still chased butterflies and talked to the wind. Ulysses, Masha whispered, breaking her vow of silence. And immediately the forest answered with a silence, a peculiar, ringing silence in which even the churring of grasshoppers died away, leaving only the beating of her own heart. She ran. She ran without choosing a path, crashing through raspberry thickets and low juniper. Branches lashed her face, leaving bloody scratches. She knew this forest like the back of her hand, and by feel alone, by the smell of moss, she steered toward that old linden where Ulysses usually set his traps. When she burst into the clearing, the first thing she saw was a perfect circle, 5 paces across. The grass inside was not merely trampled, it was burned to ash, to a black, sintered crust. And in the centre of the circle lay a puddle. The water was black, oily, reflecting neither the sky nor the pine tops, nor even Masha's own face as she bent over it. Instead of her reflection, she saw only a dark, bottomless depth, and something looking back at her from within. Masha raised her palm to her mouth to stifle a scream. She did not know what had happened to her brother. She knew only one thing: the tracks on the ground. 3 huge indentations, like cloven hooves with claws, led not deeper into the forest, but straight into that black puddle. "The enemy," she whispered, and her voice cracked. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small clay figurine of a bear, a charm her grandmother had given her before she died. She squeezed it so hard its edges cut into her palm. "Do you hear me, brother? Hold on. I will come, whatever it costs me." The wind blew again, and from somewhere far away, from the depths of the dry forest, came a sound like a child's laughter. Masha shuddered. The laughter was too familiar. It was Ulysses' laugh. But it came from the black water. Chapter 2. Call of the Ancestors. She returned to the village long after midnight, quiet as a mouse so as not to wake the neighbours. Only a few hours remained before dawn, but Masha knew, if she fell asleep now, she might never wake up. Or she would wake, but not here. The hut greeted her with the smell of dried herbs and stale bread. On the stove, a tiny icon lamp flickered, suspended from the ceiling. Her grandmother had always said the fire must burn without cease, or the house would become empty, and the undead would walk in. Masha kicked off her wet bast shoes, stripped down to her linen shirt, and stood barefoot on the cold earthen floor. Her body ached. The scratches stung, but that was nothing. The important thing was that she had the crowbone. Old, bleached, found last spring beneath that very boulder at the edge of the bog. Masha laid it on the table, beside a bowl of clean water, a bunch of wormwood, and 3 coals from the stove. Not dead embers, but glowing with red veins. The rite of divination upon the crowbone was not fortune-telling. It was a violent intrusion into another's sleep, or another's death. Masha closed her eyes. She exhaled. She whispered the incantation, letting each word fall upon the bone like a drop of wax. Crowbird, blackbird, between life and death you are the gate. Your eye sees where the shadow is, where the soul is. Show me where my brother is, where his body is, where his thought is. She took the bone, dipped it in the water, then drew it across the coals. A black trace remained on the white surface, twisting, broken, like a bolt of lightning. And in that instant, Masha plunged into the trance. She was no longer standing in the hut. She was standing in the halls of the fire ore. It was an endless space, with neither earth nor sky. Everywhere, red, pulsing walls, veins of metal glowing blue and green. The air here was thick as molten copper, and breathing it hurt. She could see far, far away, as far as her gaze could reach, enormous silhouettes. They glided along the walls like fish in deep water, but they were immense, hundreds of times larger than a man. Dragons. She knew this not with her mind, but with her body. Every cell shrieked with terror. But terror was secondary. Primary was the thought of her brother. "Where are you?" she shouted into the void, and the echo rolled through the halls, multiplying and distorting. In answer, right before her in the air, Ulysses' face appeared. A living face. He was asleep, but not as people sleep. His eyelids were half open, and beneath them was not darkness, but white light. Bottomless, blinding light. "Masha," he whispered, though his lips did not move. "It's so beautiful here. Don't follow me, or they will take you too." "Who?" she asked, but the vision vanished, and in its place loomed something terrible. A gigantic maw, gaping like the abyss of hell, with 3 rows of teeth. Inside that maw, she saw herself. Small, broken, defenseless. "Masha!" A sharp voice came from outside, wrenching her out of the trance. She opened her eyes. The hut was dark. The lamp had almost died. Behind the door stood an old neighbour, Kuzma, and his voice trembled. "There, in the garden, a wonder beast. Black, it's eating carrion." Masha sprang up, snatching a sickle from the wall as she ran. She burst into the yard and caught a glimpse of something swooping low over the rooftops. No bird, no beast. A hunched silhouette, with leathery wings dripping bile, leaving smoking tracks on the thatch. A small carrion dragon. A foul creature, sent by the unclean to scout the way for the great ones to follow. "Stop!" Masha screamed, throwing herself in front of the neighbour's hut, where a child was crying. She raised her sickle arm, and the words of the spell flew from her chest of their own accord, heavy as stones. "With the lock-word I bar the way. With the path-word I close the gate. Who enters shall not leave. Who touches shall perish." Something cracked in the air, like breaking ice. The carrion dragon smashed into an invisible wall 3 paces from her, and rebounded, hissing and spewing sulphurous smoke. It fell to the ground, twitched, and died, crumbling into a heap of grey ash. Masha lowered her hand. Her palm trembled. She understood. This was only the beginning. The carrion dragon had been a scout. If it had come here, then the corrupt ones already knew about Yelisei, and they would come for him again. "You will not touch him," she whispered into the night. "You will not touch any of us, as long as I live." The wind howled in answer, and somewhere beyond the horizon, the forest swayed, as if an immense creature had rolled over onto its other side. Chapter 3. Entry into the Stone. At dawn, Masha left. She did not say goodbye to the neighbours, did not take bread, only her pail of herbs, her flint, and her grandmother's serpent amulet on her breast, polished smooth as glass. She knew she needed the cave, the entrance to which opens only for those who do not fear to die. The journey to the Pechora foothills took 2 days. 2 days she walked through the taiga without stopping, sometimes grabbing raw mushrooms and chewing them on the move, washing them down with stream water. When she saw the cliff, a monstrous slab of black stone jutting straight into the sky, her heart clenched. It looked like the ribs of an ancient beast lodged in the earth. The entrance was at the foot, a narrow fissure barely wide enough for a teenager to squeeze through, or a slender young woman. Masha lit a splinter of pine and stepped inside. The cave smelled of antiquity, not of stone and damp like all caves, but of something both sweet and metallic. She raised the torch higher and saw the walls. They were not smooth. They were covered with strange growths, which she first took for stalactites. But when she drew closer, she vomited. They were petrified intestines. Enormous, as thick as her arm, they writhed along the walls, disappearing into the rock and emerging again. They were hard as stone, but inside them, if you looked closely, you could make out a grey dust, something that had once been alive. "Do not look at them," she said aloud, to keep from going mad. "Walk straight, only forward." The fissure narrowed, and after a few dozen paces, Masha had to turn sideways to pass. At one point, the rock squeezed her chest so tight she knew if she breathed in, she would be stuck forever. She held her breath, slipped through, and found herself in a space far larger than the cliff outside. Far larger. It was a hall stretching into infinity. Ahead, a mist swirled, dense, grey, utterly impenetrable. Behind her, a solid wall. The entrance was gone. River of Oblivion, Masha guessed. Her grandmother had told her of it before she died. She said the dead had their own river, where they waited for the living to arrive. And if a living person entered it with a soul full of regrets, they would never come out. Only if they could prove they were not dead, that they were needed by the living. Masha stepped into the mist. The voices came instantly. They whispered her name, laughed and wept. She heard her grandmother saying, "Turn back, granddaughter. Leave this. Let the beasts fight among themselves." She heard her mother, whom she did not remember but whose voice was warm and tender. "You are tired, daughter. Rest. Eternity is so sweet." She heard Yelisei himself, calling her to play, to gather honey, to come home. She almost gave in, but at the last moment she gripped the serpent amulet so hard it bit into her skin, and she remembered. She remembered her brother's eyes in that vision, white, bottomless, but alive. He was not here. He was beyond the veil, and if she lay down now, he would never return. "I am alive!" she screamed into the mist. "By the will of the clan, I am alive! I carry life, not death. In the name of the mother damp earth who holds my feet and the fire that burns in my breast, depart, withdraw." The voices fell silent. The mist parted, and Masha saw that she was standing on the threshold of another reality. Before her lay a world where trees grew roots upward, and snow fell from the ground toward the sky. In the distance, islands hovered, torn from the earth and frozen in mid-air like great boulders hurled by giants. There was no sun here. Instead, at the centre of this suspended world, a sphere blazed, moving vertically, now rising to the heights, now sinking into the abyss. And from this motion, everything around flickered with crimson and black. The garland, Masha realized. She was in the world of dragons. She took a step forward, and instantly she was seized. 4 scaly warriors with wooden swords covered in strange runes surrounded her. One of them, tall and gaunt, leaned down and hissed, barely opening his mouth. "You have broken the boundary. You came without summons. You will die." "I came for my brother," Masha answered, looking him straight in the eyes. "Take me to Belisar." The warriors exchanged glances. A human who knew their master's name. That was no ordinary human. They bound her hands behind her back with a rawhide strap and dragged her toward one of the floating islands where a golden tent stood. Masha did not resist. She walked with them, straining her eyes into the distance, hoping to catch a glimpse of a single fair head. So far, she saw only shadows, huge, gliding shadows in the sky, and those who moved those shadows already knew she had go. The game had begun. Chapter 4. Wings Over the Thicket. They dragged her across the floating islands, and with every step, Masha's understanding of the world tilted, as if the ground itself had learnt to lie. The trees here, if one could call them trees, grew with their roots pointing toward the grey, bottomless sky, while their crowns reached down into the abyss below, where a faint, ghostly snow drifted upward, defying all reason. She walked on what should have been the underside of the world, and yet her feet found purchase as if on solid earth. The scaly warriors did not speak. They moved with a fluid, reptilian grace, their wooden swords tapping rhythmically against their thighs. Masha studied them from the corner of her eye. Their faces were human-like, but too sharp, too angular, cheekbones that could cut glass, nostrils that flared with every breath as if tasting the air for fear. They were not dragons, she realized. They were servants. Changelings, perhaps, or the offspring of dragons who had taken human form to better guard the borders. The golden tent appeared without warning, materializing out of the shifting crimson light of the vertical sun. It was not made of cloth, it was made of scales, thousands upon thousands of silver-grey plates, each one larger than a shield, overlapping like the armour of a mythical beast. The tent pulsed faintly, as if the scales were still alive, still breathing. The warriors thrust her forward, and she stumbled inside. The interior was vast, a hall of polished bone and woven light. At its centre, upon a dais of fused stone and petrified wood, sat the dragon. He was not in his full form. He sat as a man, tall, gaunt, with silver hair that fell to his waist and skin the colour of pale ash. But his eyes gave him away. They were not human eyes. They were the eyes of a creature that had watched continents sink and rise, eyes the colour of wood smoke, deep and ancient and utterly unreadable. A thin, almost imperceptible sheen of scales glistened along his cheekbones and the backs of his hands. "You are the one called Masha," he said. His voice was soft, like the rustle of dry leaves, but it filled the vast hall without effort. "The healer, the keeper of the Dove Book." "I am," she said, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "And you are Belisar, guardian of the northern gates. They told me you were a good dragon." A faint smile touched his lips. It was not a kind smile. "Good and evil are words for mayflies. We are older than your morality, little healer. We are forces. I am the force that closes doors. Chernobog is the force that opens them. And your brother, Yelise, is the key to all doors." "My brother is a child," Masha said, her voice hardening. "He has no part in your war." "On the contrary," Belisar rose from his dais and walked toward her, his movements fluid and silent. Your brother was born with the gift of silent purity. Do you know what that means, Masha? His soul has no weight, no anchor to this world or the next. For a dragon, such a soul is ambrosia, a morsel of eternity. To devour it is to taste the untainted essence of creation. Chernobog wants to consume him. I, on the other hand, merely want to close the gate that Chernobog is forcing open. Your brother's soul, if released properly, could seal that gate forever.
You want to kill him.
No. Belisar stopped before her, close enough that she could smell the faint ozone of his breath. I want to use him. There is a difference. But I am not the one who decides. The Council of Bones will decide, and they are already assembled. Before she could protest, 2 of the warriors seized her arms and dragged her out of the golden tent. The light of the vertical sun bathed the world in shades of blood and rust. And there, in the distance, upon a plain of cracked grey earth, she saw the council. It was a circle of fossilized remains, the bones of dragons so ancient that they had turned to stone, forming a natural amphitheatre of ribs and vertebrae, bleached white and blackened with age. Within that circle, a crowd had gathered, hundreds of dragonkin, in forms both man and beast, their eyes gleaming like dying embers. And at the far end, looming over them all, sat the one she had seen in her vision, Chernobog. He was immense. Even in his half-form, he towered above the others, a mountain of rust-coloured scales and oozing slime, with 3 great maws where a single mouth should be, each filled with jagged, broken teeth. His breath was visible, a greenish miasma that made the very air around him shimmer and decay. "This is the one?" Chernobog's voice was a chorus of gargling stones, each mouth speaking a different note, harmonizing into a cacophony of terror. "This insect?" Masha held her ground, though her knees threatened to buckle. "I am here to claim my brother, and I am here to offer you a choice." The assembled council hissed with laughter. Chernobog's middle maw opened wider, revealing a gullet that seemed to stretch into infinity. "Choice?" he rumbled. "Little insect, your brother's soul will be my feast tonight. His purity will shatter the gates of Alatyr, and my legions will pour into your world like a flood of rust. There is no choice." Masha forced herself to step forward. "Then why haven't you already eaten him?" The laughter stopped. Chernobog's 6 eyes narrowed to slits. "Because," Belisar's voice cut through the silence, stepping up beside her, "even he knows that a soul taken by force is bitter. It must be offered, freely. And that boy, he does not fear death. He does not fear you, Chernobog. He is too pure to fear. You cannot take him unless he gives himself." Masha's heart soared with a desperate, fleeting hope. "Then hear my offer," she said, raising her voice so that all could hear. "I am a healer. I am not a warrior. I cannot fight your armies, Chernobog, and I will not kill my own brother. But I can close the gate. I can seal the passage between your world and mine from both sides. I will do this if you release my brother and let us leave." A terrible silence followed. The vertical sun slid down the sky, casting long, distorting shadows. "You," Chernobog rumbled, "a mere mortal child. You would seal the Alatyr gate?" "I would," Masha said, "and I will." Belisar turned to her, his smoky eyes unreadable. "Do you know what you are promising, girl? The ritual requires a sacrifice, not of blood, but of memory, of love, of the very things that make you human. I know, she lied. Chernobog's 3 maws twisted into a grotesque smile. Very well, little insect. I grant you this farce. You have until the sunset of this day, and in this world the sun moves fast. He gestured with a massive, clawed hand toward the crimson sphere, which was already beginning its rapid descent toward the abyss. If you fail, not only will I devour your brother's soul, I will consume his flesh before your very eyes, and then I will send you back to your world, broken and weeping, so that all your kind may know their doom. So be it, Masha said, her voice steady though her hands trembled. But first, show me my brother. Show me that he lives. Chernobog nodded slowly, and from the shadows behind him, 2 of his servants dragged forward a small, limp figure. It was Yelisei. He was unharmed, no cuts, no bruises, but his eyes were wide open, and they were white. Completely white, like 2 eggshells set in his face. His lips moved soundlessly, as if he was speaking to someone only he could see. Masha bit down on her scream. What have you done to him? Nothing, Chernobog hissed. His soul is still inside him, but it is dreaming. We separated it from his body just a little, so that it might taste the freedom of this world. Do not worry, healer. He is not dead. Not yet. Untie him, Masha demanded. If I am to save him, I need him whole. Another wave of hissing laughter rippled through the council, but Chernobog motioned, and the servants released the boy. Yelisei crumpled to the ground, breathing shallowly, his white eyes staring at nothing. Masha knelt beside him and placed her hand on his chest. His heart beat, slow, steady, but distant, like a drum heard from across a vast plain. She looked up at Belisar, who watched her with an expression she could not read. Help me, she whispered. Please. Belisar inclined his head, just a fraction. I will give you time, healer, but I cannot fight your battles for you. The fate of both worlds now rests on your shoulders. He turned to the council, his voice ringing like a bell. The council is adjourned until the sunset. The human will present her seal, or she will present her failure. Let it be witnessed. The bones of the amphitheatre groaned as the dragonkin dispersed, melting into shadows and mists. Chernobog lingered a moment longer, his 3 maws dripping viscous saliva onto the grey earth. Run, little insect, he whispered, the words coiling around her like smoke. Run and prepare your little rituals. It will make the feast so much sweeter when I watch you fail. And then he was gone, swallowed by the crimson twilight. Masha held her brother's dreaming body, and for the first time, she allowed herself to weep, silent, desperate tears that soaked into the grey, salt-encrusted earth. But when she raised her head again, her eyes were dry and her jaw was set. Get up, she told herself. You have until sunset. Move. And she moved. Chapter 5. Court of Bones. Belisar led her to a small hollow, hidden among the fossilized ribs of an ancient leviathan, where the glow of the vertical sun could not reach. Here, in the perpetual twilight of bone and shadow, he laid out the terms of her impossible task. The Alatir Gate, he began, drawing a circle in the dust with his silver-clawed finger, is not a door. It is a wound. Chernobog tore it open when he tried to cross into your world a century ago. Your ancestors sealed it with the blood of 100 warriors. But the seal is old, and the wound has festered. To close it properly, you must do more than patch the skin. You must heal the flesh beneath. How? Masha asked, her hands still pressed against Yelisei's chest, feeling the faint flutter of his heartbeat. There is an artifact, Belisar said. The Needle of Death. It lies in Chernobog's own lair, hidden in the deepest chamber of his halls of rust. It is the only thing that can stitch the fabric of two worlds together without tearing it further. But to use it, you must touch it with your bare hands, and you must speak the word of origin, the language that was spoken before the first fire was kindled. I know that word, but I am forbidden to speak it aloud, for doing so would break my own binding to the northern gates. Then teach it to me, Masha said. Whisper it. I'll remember. Belisar shook his head slowly. I cannot speak it, but you can read it. On the needle itself, the word is carved. You need only open your eyes and see. Masha looked down at her own hands. They were still caked with the soil of her world, the earth of the tiger. And to get to this needle, I have to go through Chernobog's domain. Through the salt marshes that surround his lair, Belisar confirmed. The ground there is not earth. It is his breath, solidified. It will burn your skin, blind your eyes, and if you stay too long, it will turn you to salt from the inside out. Is there a way to survive it? Belisar's smoky eyes glimmered with something like respect. There are old rites. Your grandmother's grandmother would have known them. You must build a shelter of protection, a ring of rye and chalk, mixed with soil taken from the grave of one who was never baptized. The unbaptized have no claim on the heavens, but they have deep roots in the earth. Their soil is immune to the salt. And you must enchant your clothes, your scarf, so that they become armor against the corrosion. Masha closed her eyes. She remembered her grandmother's teachings, the rites of the old ways, half forgotten and forbidden by the priests. She knew where to find rye. She knew where to find chalk. And she knew of a grave in the forest beyond her village, where an unbaptized child had been buried 3 summers ago. But she was not in her world now. She was in the garland, suspended above an abyss of madness. I have nothing, she said, her voice cracking. I have no earth, no rye, no chalk. Belisar reached into his own robes and withdrew a small pouch, made of something soft and scaled. I have collected these over the centuries. The earth of your world, gathered from a crossroads where 3 suicides were buried. The chalk from the cliffs of the White Sea. And the rye I grew myself, in a garden of moonlight, to keep the old ways alive. He placed the pouch in her hands. It was warm, vibrating with a faint hum of ancient power. Thank you, she whispered. Do not thank me yet, Belisar said. I give you these tools, but the journey is yours alone. Chernobog's lair is guarded not by warriors, but by memories. The salt marshes will show you your own failures, your own sins, your own deepest fears. You will have to walk through them without flinching. Can you do that? Masha looked at her brother, lying motionless in the hollow. His white eyes stared at the bone ceiling, and his lips still moved, forming the same silent word over and over. Mama, Mama. She pressed the pouch to her heart. I can do it. I have to. Then go, Belazar said, rising to his full height. The needle of death is hidden in a chamber that only opens at the lowest point of the vertical sun, when the light is weakest and the shadows are deepest. You have perhaps 2 hours by the measure of your world. Use them well. Masha tied the pouch around her waist, bent down and kissed her brother's forehead. I will come back for you, she whispered. I promise. And she left the hollow, stepping out into the crimson twilight of the garland, toward the marshes of salt that lay beyond the horizon. Chapter 6. Salt of the Earth. The salt marshes stretched before her, an endless plain of white and grey, cracked like old skin. The ground crunched under her feet, and with every step she felt a faint, burning sensation through the soles of her bast shoes. The air itself tasted of brine and rot, and in the distance she could see shapes moving. Not dragons, but something worse. Ghosts. Memories given form. She found a flat stone, black and smooth, and knelt upon it. From the pouch she carefully withdrew the rye, the chalk, and the dark, loamy soil of the unbaptized grave. She mixed them together with her fingers, forming a paste that smelled of iron and mildew. Circle of protection, she whispered, tracing a ring around herself in the grey dust. Ring of the earth, ring of the bone, ring of the forgotten and the alone. The words came to her as if from another life, another voice. She did not question them. She simply spoke, and as she spoke, the paste began to glow with a faint, sickly light. The burning sensation in her feet subsided, replaced by a strange, numbing cold. Next, she untied her headscarf, a simple piece of linen, dyed blue with woad, worn thin from years of use. She held it before her and began the enchantment. By the iron of the plough, by the stone of the mountain, by the fire of the hearth, become iron, become stone, become fire. Let no tooth pierce you, no claw rend you, no breath corrupt you. She felt the linen grow stiff in her hands, like metal, and then soften again, imbued with a hidden strength. She wrapped it around her head and neck, and instantly the stinging air became bearable. She rose and walked into the marshes. The salt crunched, the wind howled, and the shapes in the distance grew closer. They were not dragons. They were people she had known. Her grandmother, her mother, the neighbours from her village. They pointed at her with skeletal fingers and laughed. You left him, her grandmother's voice hissed. You left Yelisei to die. What kind of sister are you? You were never good enough, her mother's voice added. Always the healer, never the warrior. Weak. Soft. You will fail. Masha gritted her teeth and kept walking. You are not real, she said aloud. You are salt and memory. I am real. I am alive. I am here for him. The voices grew louder, more vicious. She saw herself at 5 years old, crying over a dead bird. She saw herself at 12, failing to save a neighbour's child from fever. She saw every failure, every doubt, every moment of weakness, and the marsh amplified them, hurling them at her with the force of a physical blow. But she did not stop. She walked for what felt like hours, though in truth it could have been minutes. The vertical sun slid lower, casting the world into a deeper crimson shadow. And finally, she saw it. The entrance to Chernobog's lair. It was a maw, a literal maw, carved into the face of a cliff, lined with petrified teeth the size of tree trunks. The entrance itself was a gaping throat, dark and pulsing with a faint, rhythmic breath, as if the mountain were alive and dreaming. Masha took a deep breath, clenched her fists, and stepped inside. The interior was worse than the marshes. The walls were wet and oozing, covered in a slime that glowed a sickly green. The air was thick, suffocating, and the ground beneath her feet was not stone but tissue, soft, yielding, like walking on the tongue of a dead giant. She gagged but pushed forward. She had no guide, no map, only the memory of Belisar's words. The needle is in the deepest chamber, where the light is weakest and the shadows are deepest. She found it by accident, a small hidden alcove tucked behind a curtain of hanging tendons. There, upon a pedestal of black obsidian, lay the needle. It was no larger than her hand, but it pulsed with a dark, cold radiance. It was made of something that was not metal, not bone, not stone, something that seemed to drink the light around it. And carved upon its surface, in letters that writhed and shifted like living worms, was the word of origin. Masha reached out her hand. Her fingers trembled as they closed around the needle. And then, from the darkness behind her, a voice rumbled. A voice of 3 harmonies, gargling with malice. "Did you really think I would let you touch it so easily, little insect?" She spun around. Chernobog's 3 maws emerged from the shadows, filling the alcove with the stench of decay. His 6 eyes burned with a mocking light. "I bargained for time," Masha said, clutching the needle to her chest. "You agreed." "I agreed to let you try," Chernobog purred, slithering closer. "I did not agree to let you succeed. The council is not here, healer. Your little silver guardian is far away, and I am very, very hungry." He lunged. Masha dropped to the ground, rolling between his massive claws. She scrambled to her feet and ran, the needle burning in her palm, the darkness of the lair closing in around her like a fist. She had the artifact, but now she had to survive long enough to use it. Chapter 7. The Rotten Fens. She ran without breath, without thought, her lungs burning with the thick, sulphurous air of Chernobog's lair. The needle of death blazed in her palm like a shard of frozen lightning, and behind her, the mountain itself seemed to move, a grinding, slithering avalanche of rust and malice. "Run, little insect, run!" Chernobog's 3 voices echoed through the twisting tunnels, bouncing off the wet, pulsing walls. "The chase makes the meals so much sweeter." Masha dodged left, then right, her bare feet slapping against the organic floor. The tunnel narrowed, and she dropped to her hands and knees, scrabbling through a passage so tight that the slimy walls pressed against her shoulders. Behind her, she heard the splintering crack of stone. Chernobog's massive form forcing itself through, his scales scraping sparks from the rock. She emerged into a wider chamber, and her heart sank. 3 guards blocked her path, draconian warriors with leathery wings folded tight against their backs, their wooden swords raised. Their eyes, slit-pupilled and yellow, tracked her movements with predatory precision. "The master said to bring her alive," one hissed, "but he didn't say in one piece." Masha skidded to a halt. The needle burned in her hand, but she had no weapon, no spell ready. She could feel the moisture in the air, the thick, greasy condensation that dripped from the walls of this festering place. Her grandmother's teachings surfaced from the depths of her memory. In every drop of water, there is memory. In every memory, there is a choice. You can ask the water to forget. She opened her mouth and spoke the words before she could hesitate, a twisted version of the dew incantation, corrupted to serve her purpose. Dew, dew, mother water, with the juice of the enemy brother's blood, remember your anger, remember your salt. Boil in their veins, burn in their breath, turn their own moisture against them. The effect was instantaneous. The condensation on the guard's own scaly hides began to sizzle. It bubbled, turned milky white, then green, then black. The moisture did not evaporate. It ignited, eating through their armor, their flesh, their bones, as if their own blood had turned to acid. The guards howled, dropping their swords, clawing at their melting faces. One of them collapsed, dissolving into a steaming puddle of ichor. Masha did not wait to watch. She scrambled over the dissolving remains, her feet burning from contact with the acidic sludge, and plunged into the next tunnel. Behind her, Chernobog laughed, a deep, gargling sound that shook the foundations of the lair. Clever, clever little insect. You use my own filth against my servants, but you cannot use it against me. I am the source of the filth. I am the rot itself. She ran faster, ignoring the pain in her feet. The tunnel began to slope upward, and she could see a faint grey light ahead. The exit. The vertical sun must be nearing its lowest point, casting a pallid twilight across the garland. She was almost there. And then the tunnel collapsed, not in front of her, behind her. A cascade of rock and petrified tissue thundered down, cutting off her retreat. But the collapse also exposed a side passage, narrow and jagged, leading off into darkness. Masha made a split-second decision and dove into the side passage, just as a massive, rust-coloured claw smashed through the floor where she had been standing. "Where are you, insect?" Chernobog roared. His 3 mouths bellowed in dissonant harmony, and the sound was so loud it made her ears bleed. Masha crawled deeper into the darkness, clutching the needle to her chest. The passage was barely wide enough for her shoulders, and the walls scraped her raw. But it was dry here, no moisture, no slime. The air was still, dead, as if this part of the lair had been forgotten even by its master. She crawled for what felt like an eternity, and then the passage opened into a small, silent chamber. It was empty except for a single, moss-covered stone, and on the stone, in letters that glowed with a faint, phosphorescent light, she read the words, "Here lies the heart of the rotten fens, the heart that beats for the lost, the heart that waits for the pure." She didn't understand the meaning, but she didn't need to. She had the needle. She had her way out. The chamber had another exit, a narrow crack leading back into the open air of the garland. She squeezed through, her body screaming with exhaustion. The grey twilight of the vertical sun met her eyes, and she fell to her knees on the salt-encrusted earth, gasping for breath. She had escaped. For now. But as she looked back at the lair, she saw the mountain shudder, and from its depths a terrible silence descended. Chernobog was not coming out of the hole he had torn. He was coming through the walls. And he was faster than she had thought. Chapter 8. Blood for Blood. She ran across the salt marshes, her feet bleeding, the needle clutched against her heart. The grey earth crunched beneath her, and the distant shapes of the dead began to coalesce again, but she paid them no heed. The only thing that mattered was the sound behind her, the grinding, slithering approach of Chernobog, who had abandoned the tunnels and was now tearing through the marshes themselves, his massive body carving a trench of black ooze across the white plain. "You cannot outrun me, healer," his voices howled. "I am the earth beneath you. I am the salt that burns your feet. I am the air that strangles your lungs." Masha stumbled, fell, scrambled to her feet. She was so close to the garland's edge, to the hollow where she had left Ulysses, but she could see in her mind's eye the vertical sun dipping below the horizon. Time was running out. And then, from the shadows of a fossilized ribcage, a figure emerged. Silver, gaunt, his smoky eyes blazing with a light she had not seen before, a light of ancient, terrible purpose. Belisar. He stepped into her path, blocking Chernobog's advance. His human form flickered, the scales along his jaw spreading, his fingers lengthening into claws. He did not look at Masha. His eyes were fixed on the oncoming storm of rust and slime. "Run," he said. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "Take the needle to the gate. I will hold him." "No!" Masha gasped. "You can't! He'll kill you!" "Perhaps," Belisar replied, and for the first time he smiled. A real smile, sad and weary and filled with a strange, ancient peace. "But I have watched for 1,000 years, healer. I have guarded gates that no one remembered. I have held back darkness that no one believed in. I am tired. And I have seen what you carry in your heart. It is enough." He stepped forward, and his form shifted. The silver scales spread across his entire body, his face elongated, his spine arched. In the space of a heartbeat, he was no longer a man. He was a dragon, smaller than Chernobog, but sleek and swift, with wings that shimmered like moonlight on water. "Belisar," Chernobog rumbled, slowing to a halt. "The Silver Guardian, the eternal gatekeeper. You would throw away your immortal life for this might." "She is not a might," Belisar said, his voice now a resonant hum, like a bell struck deep underground. "She is the future. And you, Chernobog, are the past that must be buried." He lunged. The two dragons collided with a sound like mountains breaking. Silver and rust, light and shadow, they tore at each other with tooth and claw. The salt marshes erupted around them, geysers of grey dust, cracks that split the earth. Masha watched, frozen, as Belisar drove his claws into Chernobog's middle maw, forcing the three-headed beast backward. But Chernobog was stronger. He wrapped his massive tail around Belisar's neck and squeezed, his three mouths biting down on the silver dragon's wings. "Go!" Belisar screamed, his voice cracking. "Go now, Masha! I cannot hold him for long!" Still, she hesitated. And then Belisar made the choice that changed everything. With a wrenching, wet scream, he tore off his own wing. Silver scales shattered like mirrors, and black ichor, not blood but something colder, older, poured from the wound. He hurled the severed wing into the path between them, and where it landed, it changed. The wing stiffened, grew, transformed into a wall of pure, unbreakable obsidian, sealing the gap between Masha and Chernobog. The rust-coloured dragon roared, slamming against the wall, but it held. Belisar collapsed, his body shrinking back into human form. He lay in the salt, his face pale, his eyes dimming. Masha ran to him, dropping to her knees beside him. "Why?" she whispered, cradling his silver-haired head in her lap. "Why would you do this?" Belisar coughed, and a trickle of black ichor ran from his lips. "Because I have seen the future," he whispered. "I have seen what happens if you fail. A world of rust and rot, where children forget how to laugh and rivers run with acid. and I have seen what happens if you succeed. A world that remembers. A world that still has a chance. He reached up with a trembling hand and touched her cheek. His fingers were cold, so cold. The word of origin, he breathed. I cannot speak it aloud. It would break the gate before you can seal it. But I can show it to you, the way only the dead can show. His smoky eyes flared one last time, and she felt it, a stream of pure knowledge pouring into her mind. The word. Not letters, not sounds, but a shape, a texture, a weight. She knew it now, as deeply as she knew her own name. Belisar's hand fell away. I am sorry, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I am so sorry. His lips moved one last time, forming the faintest whisper. Don't be sorry. Be swift. And then he was gone. His body crumbled to silver dust, and the dust scattered on the salt wind, forming a faint, shimmering cloud that rose toward the vertical sun. Masha knelt there for a moment, her heart breaking. But she did not have time to mourn. Behind the obsidian wall, Chernobog was still roaring, still pounding, and the obsidian was beginning to crack. She rose, clutching the needle. She ran. Chapter 9. The Lizard's Eye. She ran until the salt marshes gave way to the familiar fossil ribs of the council amphitheatre. But the amphitheatre was empty now. The dragonkin had dispersed, and only the bones remained, white and black and grey, silent witnesses to the ages. She did not stop. She ran toward the hollow where she had left Yelisei. But as she approached, something changed. The world tilted. The crimson light of the vertical sun flickered, wavered, and then stabilized into something else. Something golden and warm and utterly, impossibly familiar. She was standing in her village. The birch trees swayed gently in the breeze. The thatched roofs of the huts smoked peacefully. A dog barked in the distance, and she could smell fresh bread baking. It was her home. It was everything she had ever longed for. And standing at the threshold of her own hut, holding a bowl of milk, was Yelisei. His eyes were no longer white. They were his own, blue-grey, clear, alive. He smiled at her, and the smile was so bright, so innocent, that her heart nearly broke with relief. Masha, he called, running toward her. You're back! I was so scared. I thought I'd never see you again. She knelt to embrace him, but something made her hesitate. His voice was right. His face was right. Everything was right. Too right. She looked around. The village was perfect, cleaner than she remembered, brighter, more peaceful. No mud, no flies, no poverty. The sun was warm, but it cast shadows that fell in odd directions. Wait, shadows. She looked down at her own shadow. It stretched out behind her, dark and normal. But then she looked at Yelisei's shadow. It did not fall away from him. It fell toward the light, and it was separate, detached, writhing on the ground like a living thing. And then she saw the worst horror of all. The shadows of the birch trees did not fall on the ground. They fell upward, onto the trees themselves, as if the darkness were grafted to the light. A shadow cannot fall on its own source. This was not a village. This was an illusion. A perfect, beautiful, soul-crushing illusion. Masha, drink the milk, Yelisei said, holding up the bowl. His smile was still bright, but his eyes had a faint, flickering yellow tint at the edges. It will make you feel better. It will make you stay. She looked into the bowl. The milk was white, creamy, wholesome. She could smell the sweetness of it, the promise of rest, of safety, of giving up. And then she noticed the pot beside the door. A clay pot, old and chipped, filled with honey, thick, amber, golden. The honey she had saved for the winter, the honey Yelisei had always loved. The honey was a symbol of sweetness, of lies, of the things that were too good to be true. She took the pot, raised it above her head, and smashed it against the ground. "No more lies!" she screamed. The illusion shattered like glass. The village, the trees, the warmth, all of it dissolved into 1,000 shimmering fragments. And Masha was back in the hollow, back in the cold grey light of the garland, gasping for breath. Above her, embedded in the fossilized rib of a dead leviathan, was an eye. A single, massive eye. Yellow, slit-pupilled, swirling with malice. It was Chernobog's eye, projected through the veil, weaving the illusion with the skill of a master tormentor. "Very good," the eye hissed, its pupil contracting to a razor-sharp line. "Very good, little insect. You passed my little test. But you cannot pass the gate. The gate requires sacrifice. And you, healer, are too weak to give what is needed." Masha grabbed the needle from her belt, and without hesitation, she drove it into the eye. The eye burst like a boil, spraying a foul, gelatinous liquid across the bones. A scream of agony echoed across the garland. Chernobog's scream, distant but unmistakable. "You won't take him," Masha panted, her chest heaving. "You won't take anyone else." She turned to her brother. He was still lying in the hollow, his white eyes staring at nothing. But his lips had stopped moving. He was breathing steadily, waiting. Masha knelt beside him and took his hand. "We're going home," she whispered. "I promise." But as she spoke, she felt the weight of the needle in her hand. The word of origin pulsed in her mind, and she knew that Belisar's sacrifice had bought her only a few moments more. The gate was waiting. The final test was just beginning. Chapter 10. The Forge of Perun. The hollow where Yelisei lay was no longer safe. The echo of Chernobog's screams still reverberated through the bones of the garland, and with every passing moment, the obsidian wall that Belisar had raised was cracking further. Masha could feel it in the ground beneath her feet, a rhythmic, pounding tremor, like the heartbeat of a dying god. She had no time. She had to reach the gate. But where was the gate? She closed her eyes and reached into her mind, searching for the knowledge that Belisar had given her in his dying moment. The word of origin pulsed there, a burning coal of pure meaning, but it was not enough. She needed the location. She needed the altar where the scoba mirror, the brace of the world, was driven into the fabric of reality itself. And then she felt it, a pull. A thread of silver light, invisible to her eyes but blazing in her soul, leading her away from the hollow, toward the very centre of the garland. She lifted Yelisei onto her back. He was light, too light, as if his soul's separation had drained the weight from his bones. He clung to her neck with limp arms, his white eyes staring at the sky. "Hold on, brother," she whispered. "Just a little longer." She ran. The silver thread led her across the floating islands, past forests of inverted trees and rivers that flowed upward into the abyss. She crossed bridges of petrified sinew and climbed cliffs of fused bone. The vertical sun had reached its lowest point, casting the world into a deep, bruise-coloured twilight, and the shadows stretched like grasping fingers. And then she saw it. The altar of Perun. It was not a structure built by hands. It was a wound in the earth, a crater of black, glassy stone, fused by lightning that had struck the same spot for millennia. At its centre, a single spike of iron rose from the ground, as thick as her arm, covered in rust and ancient runes. The Scoba mirror, the brace of the world. Around the altar, the air shimmered with heat. The lightning that had forged this place was not gone. It was waiting, coiled in the clouds above, ready to strike again at the slightest provocation. Masha laid Yelisei down at the edge of the crater and approached the iron spike. The needle of death pulsed in her hand, resonating with the spike, humming with a frequency that made her teeth ache. But she knew the needle alone was not enough. To pull the scoba, she had to perform the rite of fire washing. She had to anoint her hands with melted wax, protected by a shield charm, and speak the 99th psalm, not in the tongue of the priests, but in the older tongue, the language of the earth itself. She had no wax, no fire, no psalm, but she had herself. She bit down on her own arm, hard enough to draw blood. The pain focused her mind. She smeared the blood on her palms, a poor substitute for wax, but it would have to do. Then she raised her hands to the sky and began to speak. The words came from the deepest part of her, from the memory of her grandmother and her grandmother's grandmother, from the soil of the Tiger and the water of the northern rivers. She spoke the 99th psalm in the Proto-Slavic tongue, the tongue that predated the coming of the cross. Slava vo vishnych Bogu, i na zemli mir, в человецах благоволение. Но не тот Бог, что на небесах, а тот, что в камне, в огне, в коре древесной. Услышь меня, Перун громовержец, дашь мне силу твою, чтобы железом твоим запихатать врата, чтобы кровью моей умыть пороги мира. Glory in the highest to the God, and on earth peace, goodwill among men. But not that God in the heavens, but the one in the stone, in the fire, in the bark of the tree. Hear me, Perun the thunderer, give me your strength, to seal the gates with your iron, to wash the thresholds of the world with my blood. The sky answered, a bolt of lightning, not from the clouds but from the vertical sun itself, struck the iron spike. The crater blazed with white fire, and Masha felt the heat sear her skin. Her blood-smeared hands burned, but she did not pull them away. She reached out, grabbed the Scoba mirror with both hands, and pulled. The spike did not move. She pulled again, screaming with the effort. The iron was fused to the rock, fused to reality itself. Her muscles screamed, her bones cracked, and the needle in her belt glowed brighter, feeding her strength, burning her from the inside. And then, with a groan that shook the entire garland, the Scoba began to rise. Inch by inch, she pulled the brace from the earth. The crater buckled. The floating islands tilted. The vertical sun flickered as if wounded. And all around her, the world of dragons began to scream. 1,000 voices, 1,000 howls, as the fabric of their reality was torn. She pulled until the Scoba was free. In her hands, the iron spike was no longer just a spike. It was a key, a massive, ancient key, its runes blazing with white fire. And she knew, with a certainty that came from Belisar's dying gift, that she had to use it now, before the rift closed prematurely and trapped her on this side forever. She turned to the place where the gate should be. It was not a door, it was a crack in the air itself, a vertical slit, shimmering with all the colours of rot and rust. Through it, she could see her world, the tiger, the pines, the familiar muddy path that led to her village, home. But between her and the gate, an army was gathering. Chapter 11. Battle on the Bridge. The dragonkin had returned. They poured out of the fissures in the earth, out of the hollows of the fossilized bones, out of the shadows of the floating islands. Hundreds of them, scaly, winged, armed with wooden swords and obsidian spears. And at their head, still bleeding from the wound Masha had inflicted on his projected eye, rose Chernobog himself. His 3 maws were twisted with fury, his rust-coloured scales dripping a viscous, corrosive slime. The obsidian wall that Belisar had raised was now only rubble. Chernobog had broken through. "You!" he roared, his 3 voices harmonizing into a single, earth-shattering bellow. "You stole my needle! You pulled my brace! And now you will give me your brother's soul, or I will tear yours from your body and eat it while you watch." Masha clutched the scoba in one hand and the needle in the other. She had no weapons, no spells left. Her blood-smeared palms were blistered and raw. But she had something else. She had her voice. She turned to her brother, who still lay at the edge of the crater, his white eyes staring at nothing. "Yelise," she called, "I know you can hear me. I know you are still in there. I need you to stand up. I need you to walk with me." The boy did not move, but his lips parted and a sound came out. A low, clear hum, like the drone of a bee. It was not a word. It was a note. A single, perfect note. And the dragonkin hesitated. The note echoed across the crater, and something in the air shifted. The corrupt ones, the soldiers of Chernobog, began to fall back, their clawed hands pressed to their ears. The note was not loud, but it was pure. Too pure. It burned them like salt on a wound. "Keep humming!" Masha shouted, lifting her brother onto her back. "Keep humming, Yelise! It's working!" She ran. The bridge, a narrow, natural causeway of fused bone and petrified wood, led from the crater toward the gate. It was the only way across the chasm that separated the altar from the rift. And on that bridge, the remnants of Chernobog's army were regrouping. The first wave came at her with a screech. A massive, winged warrior, half man, half reptile, lunged, his obsidian spear aimed at her heart. Masha dropped to the ground, rolling beneath the thrust, and slashed upward with the needle. The blade of the artifact, no larger than her hand, sliced through the warrior's scales like butter. He collapsed, his body dissolving into grey ash. But more came. 2, 3, 5 of them. They surrounded her, their yellow eyes gleaming with hunger. Yelise's hum was faltering, weakening. Masha was out of breath, out of strength. And then, from the corner of her eye, she saw it. Chernobog, hurtling across the chasm on massive, ragged wings. He landed on the bridge with a crash that shook the causeway, sending cracks spiderwebbing along its surface. His 3 maws opened wide, and from each throat, a jet of acid-green flame erupted. Masha threw herself to the side, dragging Yelise with her. The flame missed them by inches, melting the bone where they had stood. "Little insect," Chernobog bellowed. "You cannot escape me." She scrambled to her feet, Yelisei still on her back. The gate was so close, just 50 paces away. But Chernobog was faster. He lunged, his massive claws reaching for her brother. And then Masha did something unexpected. She turned and charged. The scoba mirror, still blazing with white fire, swung in her hand like a club. She brought it down on Chernobog's middle maw with all her remaining strength. The impact was like thunder. The scoba, the iron spike that held the worlds together, pierced through Chernobog's skull. Not deeply, just enough to make him scream. His 3 voices became one, a high-pitched wail of agony that shattered the bone bridge around them. "Ah!" He reeled back, his massive claws clutching his ruined maw. The acid-green flame guttered and died. Masha did not wait. She turned and ran, her lungs burning, her heart pounding, her brother's weight on her back growing heavier with every step. She reached the gate. The vertical slit shimmered before her, a window into her own world, her own time, her own life. The tiger, the pines, the path to her village. She did not hesitate. She threw herself through. Chapter 12. The Split. The transition was like drowning. She fell through a tunnel of swirling colours, red and grey and black and white. And then, with a jarring, violent lurch, she was on solid ground. The tiger. The familiar smell of pine and damp earth. The grey, overcast sky of the northern autumn. She had made it. She was home. But the gate was still open behind her, a shimmering tear in the air, through which the howls of Chernobog and his army could still be heard. She had the scoba, she had the needle, but she had not yet sealed the rift. And now, she had to make a choice. Belisar had told her, in his dying whisper, "To seal the gate, you cannot destroy the evil. You must balance it. If you kill Chernobog, the darkness will only reform, stronger and more bitter. If you drive him away, he will return. The only way is to freeze the contract, to lock both sides in a stasis that neither can break. And for that, you must carve the runes of peace and war together on the Alatir stone itself. The Alatir stone, the heart of the world, the foundation upon which all reality rested. She had never seen it, but she knew, with a certainty that came from the word of origin, that it was right beneath her feet. The tiger floor, the mossy earth. She knelt, pressed the scoba and the needle together, and struck the ground. The earth split open. A great black slab rose from the soil, smooth as glass, cold as ice, and carved with runes so ancient that even the dragons had forgotten their meaning. The Alatir stone. Masha raised the needle, which now glowed with a pure white light. She began to carve. The first rune was peace. She carved it slowly, carefully, pouring her love for her brother, her village, her world into the stroke. The second rune was war. She carved it with anger, with fury, with the memory of Belisar's sacrifice and the pain of her own bleeding hands. Together, the 2 runes formed a single, complex symbol, a spiral that turned in 2 directions at once. It was impossible. It was contradictory. It was the only thing that could work. As she carved, the gate began to pulse. The tear in the air shuddered, stretched, and then began to shrink. The howls from the other side grew fainter, but Chernobog had not given up. His massive, rust-coloured head pushed through the shrinking rift, his 3 maws snapping at the air. His eyes, one still bleeding from Masha's attack, fixed on her with absolute, undiluted hatred. "You cannot seal me," he roared. "I am eternal. I am the darkness in every human heart. You cannot lock me away." Masha looked at him, and for the first time she felt not fear, but pity. "You are right," she said softly. "I cannot lock you away, but I can freeze you. I can put you to sleep, so deep that even your own malice will forget to wake. And in that sleep, the world will have time to heal." She cut her own hair. With the needle she sheared off her long brown braid, the symbol of her womanhood, her strength, her connection to the earth. She laid it on the Alatir stone, beside the carved runes. The sacrifice was made. The runes blazed with fire, white and black, twisting together into a single blinding column of light. The earth shook. The trees swayed. And Chernobog's head, still thrust through the gate, began to petrify. His scales turned grey. His eyes hardened into stone. His 3 maws froze in a silent, eternal scream. The gate slammed shut. The tear in the air vanished, and only a faint, shimmering scar remained, a memory of what had been. Masha fell to her knees, exhausted beyond measure. The scoba and the needle clattered to the ground, no longer glowing, now just simple iron and stone. She looked around. The tiger was still. The sky was clearing. A bird sang somewhere in the distance. And on the ground beside her, Yelisei stirred. His white eyes flickered, then faded to their normal blue-grey. He blinked, coughed, and sat up, looking at her with confusion and fear. "Masha? Where are we? What happened?" She pulled him into her arms and held him tight. "We're home," she whispered. "We're home." And in the silence that followed, only one thing remained. The dark, scarred stone, with its carved runes and her severed braid. A warning for the future. She picked up the scoba, now harmless, and began to carve one last message. If the human race tips the scales of abomination, the gates shall open again. And next time, there will be no one to close them. She buried the stone in the earth, beside the Alatir, and hoped with all her heart that no one would ever find it. Chapter 13. The Word of Origin. But the sealing was not a single moment. It was an eternity compressed into a heartbeat, a lifetime of pain and memory distilled into a single, pure note. When Masha carved the twin runes of peace and war upon the Alatir stone, she did not simply draw lines in rock. She reached into the marrow of the world, into the place where fire and ice had first met and birthed the stars. The needle of death, now blazing with a cold, white light, became an extension of her own soul, and with every stroke she felt herself being pulled apart. The vortex began to form. It rose from the earth around her, a spiraling column of 2 elements that should never have touched. On her left, a pillar of searing golden flame, hot enough to melt stone. On her right, a torrent of black, absolute cold, cold enough to shatter iron. And between them, she stood, a single, fragile bridge of flesh and bone. The word of origin burned in her mind. It was not a sound she could speak with her lips. It was a vibration that had to be felt in the depths of her chest, a frequency that matched the primal hum of creation itself. She opened her mouth, and the word poured out of her, not as syllables, but as a force. O-A-O-M-Y-M. The ancient syllables, reconstructed from Belisar's dying gift, from her grandmother's half-forgotten chants, from the very soil of the tiger, resonated through the vortex. The flame and the ice began to twist together, spiraling around her like a serpent devouring its own tail. O-A-O-M-Y-M. Perunovo Kolo. The circle of Perun, the wheel of the thunderer. The runes on the Alatia stone flared with answering light, and the scoba mirror, still in her hand, began to vibrate with a frequency that made her teeth ache. But the sealing was not a simple act of power. It was a negotiation. She could feel Chernobog's presence still lingering at the edges of the rift, his malice coiling like smoke around the vortex. He was not defeated, merely stunned, petrified in the moment of his assault. But his essence, his will, still pulsed in the air, trying to find a crack, a weakness, a way to unmake what she was creating. "You think you can freeze me?" his voice whispered from the vortex itself. "You think your little rituals can hold back the tide of human cruelty? I am not a dragon, little healer. I am a thought, a reflection. I am the shadow cast by every angry word, every clenched fist, every tear shed in hatred. You cannot seal a shadow." Masha gritted her teeth. The vortex was pulling at her, the heat and cold tearing at her skin, her hair, her very soul. Her severed braid lay on the Alatia stone, a symbol of her sacrifice, but it was not enough. She had to give more. She had to give the one thing she had never given before. She had to give her fear. She closed her eyes and let it wash over her, the terror of losing her brother, the dread of failing the world, the panic of being torn apart by forces she could not comprehend. She let it fill her chest, and then she pushed it outward, into the vortex, into the runes, into the frozen heart of Chernobog's malice. And something shifted. The vortex steadied. The flame and ice stopped tearing at each other and began to weave, like threads in a loom, forming a tapestry of light and shadow that wrapped around the gate. The rift in the air shrank, not with violence, but with the slow, inexorable certainty of a wound healing. Masha fell to her knees, gasping. The needle clattered from her hand. The scoba mirror rolled away, now just a dull, rusted spike. The gate was closing. But the word of origin was not finished. It had one final syllable, a sound that would lock the seal in place, a sound that only the living could speak, and only the dead could understand. She had heard it once before, in Belisar's dying whisper, in the moment when his soul had left his body and touched hers. She opened her mouth to speak it, and then she heard her brother scream. Chapter 14. Voices of the Corrupt. Yelisei was no longer unconscious. He was sitting up, his eyes wide open, his blue-grey irises swimming with tears. But there was something wrong with his face. His expression did not belong to him. It twisted, contorted, shifting between the innocent features of a 12-year-old boy and the feral, predatory grin of a beast. "Don't do it, Masha," he said. His voice was his own, but layered beneath it, like a chorus of whispers, were the voices of the corrupt ones. "Don't close the gate. Let them through. It will be so much better. We can be together forever." Masha's heart stopped. Yelisei, listen to me. You have to fight them." He laughed, a high, childish laugh that echoed with the malice of 1,000 hungry throats. "Fight them? Masha, they're part of me now. They crawled into my soul while you were off playing hero. They showed me what I really am. I'm not a boy, Masha. I'm a feast, a morsel, a key. and I want to open the door." He stood up, swaying on his feet, and began to walk toward the gate. The vortex swirled around him, the flame and ice parting to let him pass. No, 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 no. Masha scrambled to her feet, her body screaming with exhaustion. She grabbed his arm, but he shook her off with a strength that was not his own. His eyes flickered, one moment pleading, the next burning with yellow fire. "Yelisei, please," she cried. "You're my brother. You're not a key. You're a person. You're the boy who used to bring me honey and chase fireflies. Remember the fireflies." He paused. Something flickered in his eyes, a memory struggling to surface. "The fireflies," he whispered, and his voice was his own again, soft and confused. "The fireflies. In the meadow. By the old birch." "Yes!" Masha grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. "You caught them in a jar, and you let them go because you said it was cruel to keep them trapped. You said everything deserves to be free. That's who you are, Yelisei. That's not a key. That's not a feast. That's a boy." He blinked, and the yellow fire in his eyes guttered. The whispers receded, fading into a distant murmur. But the vortex was still unstable. The gate was still half open, a shimmering scar in the air. And beyond it, Masha could see shapes moving. The remnants of Chernobog's army, waiting for a single moment of weakness. "Masha," Yelisei said, his voice trembling. "I can feel them. They're in my head. They're telling me to cry. They're telling me my tears will unlock everything." "Don't cry," she said, pulling him into her arms. "Don't you dare cry. Your tears are your own, and they belong to you, not to them. You are pure, Yelisei. Your soul is clean, and that's why they want it. But you don't have to give it to them. You just have to stay with me. Can you do that?" He nodded, his face buried in her shoulder. "Then stay," she whispered. "Stay with me. Don't look at the gate. Don't listen to the whispers. Just hold on to me." She lifted her head and looked at the Alatea stone. The final syllable of the word of origin still hung in the air, waiting to be spoken. But to speak it, she would have to let go of her brother. She would have to stand alone, at the center of the vortex, and finish what she had started. She had no choice. "Yelisei," she said, gently pushing him back. "I need you to sit here, right here, on this stone. I need you to close your eyes and think of the fireflies. Can you do that?" He nodded again, his face pale but determined. He sat down on the edge of the Alatea stone, closed his eyes and began to hum. The same pure, clear note that had driven back the corrupt ones before. Masha rose, turned to face the vortex, and raised her hands to the sky. She spoke the final syllable of the word of origin. Ra. The sound that came from her throat was not human. It was the cry of the earth itself, the roar of the deep oceans, the whisper of the first star igniting in the void. It shook the tiger, shattered the sky, and sent a shockwave of pure white light through the gate. The vortex collapsed. The flame and ice spiraled into a single point, a pinprick of blinding radiance that hung in the air for one eternal moment, and then vanished. The gate was sealed. The world fell silent. Chapter 15. Sunset of the World. The silence was absolute. It was the silence of a land that had just been born, or just died. The trees stood motionless, The wind did not blow. Even the birds, which had fled the moment the gate opened, had not yet returned. Masha stood at the center of the crater, her arms still raised, her body trembling. The needle of death lay cold and inert at her feet. The scuba mirror was nothing more than a rusted spike, half buried in the earth. She lowered her arms, and the exhaustion hit her like a physical blow. She swayed, stumbled, and fell to her knees. But she was not alone. Ulysses opened his eyes. They were no longer white. They were no longer flickering with yellow fire. They were his own, blue-grey, clear, and filled with tears. "Masha," he whispered, I can't feel them anymore. They're gone." She crawled over to him and wrapped her arms around him. He was trembling, his small body shaking with silent sobs, but he was alive. He was whole. "They're gone," she repeated, her voice cracking. "They're sealed. You're safe." They sat there together in the crater of the Alatia stone as the sun began to set over the tiger. The sky turned orange and gold, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the world seemed peaceful. But Masha knew it was not a perfect peace. She could feel it in her bones. The seal was not forever. It was a promise, a contract frozen in time. As long as humanity remembered the old ways, as long as love and sacrifice outweighed hatred and greed, the gate would hold. But if the balance tipped too far, she pushed the thought aside. For now, she had her brother. For now, they were home. Ulysses pulled back and looked at her, his face puzzled. "Masha, why are you crying?" She touched her cheek. It was wet with tears. She hadn't even noticed. "Because I'm happy," she said, and for the first time in days, she smiled. "I'm happy you're alive." They stood up, hand in hand, and walked out of the crater. The tiger stretched before them, familiar, green, alive. The path to the village was just ahead, winding through the pines, but Masha paused at the edge of the crater and looked back. The Alatia stone was still there, half buried in the earth, covered with her carved runes and her severed braid. It was a monument to everything she had lost and everything she had saved. She picked up the needle, now just a simple iron shard, and used it to scratch one final message on the stone. «А род людской перевесит чашу мерзости, разверзнутся врата камня Алатыря, и приидет судный огонь, не по плоти, но по мыслям». If the human race tips the scales of abomination, the gates of the Alatia stone shall open, and the judgment fire shall come, not upon the flesh, but upon the thoughts. She hoped no one would ever find it, but if they did, if they read those words, she hoped they would remember. "Come on," she said, taking Ulysses' hand. "Let's go home." They walked into the forest, leaving the crater, the stone, and the sealed gate behind them. The sun set behind the trees, and the world grew quiet. Ulysses' hum faded into silence. His gift of silent purity was gone, used up in the ceiling. He was just a boy now, ordinary, fragile, mortal. But he was alive, and that was enough. The village welcomed them with open arms. The neighbours who had whispered about Masha's strange ways now embraced her as a hero. But she never spoke of what she had seen. She never spoke of Belisar or Chernobog or the garland. She simply went back to her herbs, her remedies, her quiet life on the edge of the taiga. She grew old. Her hair turned grey. Her hands, once stained with the blood of enemies and the ink of ancient runes, became gnarled with age. She never married. She never had children. She dedicated her life to teaching the old ways, the rites, the incantations, the knowledge that could seal the gates of the world. But she never forgot. And she never stopped watching the Alatir stone. Chapter 16. Farewell. The years passed like water through cupped hands. Masha grew old in the village, her once dark hair streaked with silver, her face lined with the marks of a life lived on the edge of the world. She never spoke of the garland, or the dragons, or the gate. When the neighbours asked about her strange absences, she told them she had been gathering herbs in the deep forest. When they asked about Yelisi's sudden recovery, she said the fever had broken. But she never lied to herself. Every night she dreamed of Belisar's silver scales shattering like glass. She dreamed of Chernobog's 3 moors, frozen in eternal scream. She dreamed of the Alatir stone, buried beneath the earth, waiting. Yelisi grew into a man, quiet, steady, kind. He married a girl from the next village, had children of his own, and never once spoke of the fireflies or the white-eyed darkness. The gift of silent purity was gone from him, burned away in the ceiling, and he was grateful for it. He had no desire to be a feast for hungry gods. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind howled through the pines and the moon hung low and pale, he would sit beside Masha on the porch of the old hut and ask her the same question. "Do you think they're still there? The dragons? Waiting?" Masha would look out at the dark tree line, her old eyes seeing things that no one else could see. The shimmer of silver scales in the distance, the faint glow of a rust-coloured eye in the shadows. "Waiting," she would say. "But not for us. They're waiting for the world to forget." The old woman, the healer, the keeper of the Dove Book, died on a winter's night, surrounded by her family. Her last words were a whisper, barely audible above the crackling fire. "When the scales tip, remember, the needle is not the key, the heart is." She was buried beneath the old birch tree, the one where Yelisi used to catch fireflies. No one knew the true story of her life. No one except her brother, who stood at her grave in the snow, weeping silently. And the Alatir stone slept beneath the earth, waiting for the day when humanity would remember its warning, or forget it entirely. Chapter 17. 21st Century. Prologue. Continued. The archaeological expedition had been a disaster. Professor Nikitin sat in his tent, staring at the birchbark scroll, his hands trembling. The words were burned into his mind, repeating endlessly, a mantra of doom that he could not escape. If the human race tips the scales of abomination, the gates of the Alatir stone shall open, and the judgment fire shall come. He had dismissed it as folklore, a medieval curse, a piece of historical curiosity. But the data did not lie. The electromagnetic pulse had been real. The lab assistant had gone mad, screaming the name Masha over and over again. And now, the satellite images had come back from Moscow. The anomaly was unmistakable. A massive, swirling distortion in the magnetic field, centered exactly on the spot where they had excavated the boulder. The distortion was growing, expanding, pulsing with a rhythm that reminded Nikitin of a heartbeat, a very slow, very ancient heartbeat. "The readings are off the charts," said Dr. Elena Volkov, the expedition's geophysicist, shoving a tablet into his hands. Whatever is down there, it's not geological. It's something else. Something alive. Nikitin looked at the screen. The image showed a spiral of red and black, twisting around the excavation site like a serpent. At its centre was a single dark point, a void that seemed to swallow all light. "What is it?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Elena shook her head. "I don't know, but it's growing. At this rate, it'll break through the surface in less than a week." Nikitin closed his eyes. He thought of the birchbark scroll. He thought of the mad lab assistant screaming the name of a woman who had died 1,000 years ago. And he thought of the thing he had seen when he touched the boulder. A flash of images, too fast to process, but burned into his memory. Silver scales, 3 Moors, a girl with bright eyes and a severed braid. "Masha," he whispered, "what did you do?" He didn't expect an answer, but he got one anyway. The ground beneath the tent shook. Not a tremor, not an earthquake, a pulse, deep and rhythmic, like the beating of a colossal heart. The instruments screamed, the lights flickered, and from the excavation site, a sound emerged, low, resonant, like the hum of a distant chorus. The gate was waking up. Chapter 18. The Energy Level. 3 weeks later, the world had changed. The media called it the Vologda anomaly. The military called it an unidentified geothermal event. The conspiracy theorists called it the end of days. No one called it what it truly was. Dr. Elena Volkov now sat in a sterile laboratory in Moscow, staring at a wall of monitors. The data streams were endless. Electromagnetic readings, seismic charts, thermal maps. All of them showed the same thing: an exponential increase in negative energy. She had tried to explain it to her superiors, but they had dismissed her as a hysteric. "There is no such thing as negative energy," they had said. "This is a geological phenomenon. We will study it, and we will control it." But Elena knew better. She had seen the patterns. The distortion was not random. It pulsed with human emotion, spiking during riots, flaring during wars, resonating with every act of cruelty broadcast on the news. "It's not a geological phenomenon," she said aloud, to no one in particular. "It's a mirror, a reflection of everything we've done." Her colleague, a quiet physicist named Dmitri, looked up from his calculations. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot. "Elena," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "I think I've figured out what the dragons are." She turned to look at him. "The dragons? That's folklore. We don't even know if—" "It's not folklore," he interrupted. It's a metaphor. A very literal metaphor. The dragons are not lizards. They're not even living creatures, not in the biological sense. They're thought forms, manifestations of human consciousness. The good ones, the silver ones, they're our capacity for love, for sacrifice, for hope. The bad ones, the rust ones, they're our hatred, our aggression, our fear. Elena stared at him. "That's absurd." "Is it?" Dmitri pointed at the monitors. "Look at the data. Every time there's a major conflict, the energy reading spikes. Every time there's an act of compassion, it dips. The distortion is feeding on us, Elena. It's feeding on our emotions, and it's getting stronger." He turned back to his calculations, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "I've been running simulations. If the current rate of increase continues, the distortion will breach the surface in 72 hours. And when it does—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Elena looked at the monitors. The news was playing in the corner of the screen. Footage of a new war breaking out in the east, of refugees fleeing, of bombs falling. The energy readings on the graph beside it were climbing, spiraling upward into the red zone. 72 hours, she repeated. Maybe less, Dmitri said. There's a protest in the city tonight, a big one. If it turns violent... He left the implication hanging in the air. Elena stood up. I need to see the stone, the one they brought back from the excavation. It's in the vault downstairs, locked, secured. They're treating it like a nuclear warhead. Then let's go see a nuclear warhead. Chapter 19. The Super Twist Ending. The vault was cold, sterile, and suffocating. The air hummed with the drone of climate control systems, and the walls were lined with lead and concrete. In the centre of the room, on a reinforced steel pedestal, sat the boulder. It was smaller than Elena remembered, no larger than a human head, smooth and black, with a single, jagged crack running down its centre. The crack was faintly luminescent, pulsing with a sickly, amber light. It's growing, Dmitri said, pointing at the crack. When we first brought it in, it was barely visible. Now it's almost a centimetre wide. Elena stepped closer. She could feel the heat radiating from the stone. Not thermal heat, but something else. Something that resonated in her bones, in her teeth, in the deepest, most primal part of her brain. And then, without warning, the stone fell. The pedestal collapsed. Not from any physical force, but from a sudden, inexplicable disintegration. The stone hit the concrete floor with a crack that echoed through the vault, and the crack on its surface split open, revealing a seed. It was small, black, and perfectly smooth, nestled in the hollow of the broken stone, like an embryo in a womb. For a moment, Elena could not breathe. She could not move. She could only stare at the thing that had been waiting inside the boulder for 1,000 years. And then the seed sprouted. Tendrils of black, thorned wood exploded from its surface, growing with impossible speed, twisting upward toward the ceiling. The thorns were sharp as needles, and each one was covered in a faint, oily sheen that reflected the amber light. In less than 10 seconds, the seed had become a sapling. In less than a minute, it had become a tree, a black thorn tree, the symbol of the gate's reopening. Elena stumbled backward, her heart pounding. Dmitri, we need to get out. We need to seal. But Dmitri was not moving. He was standing perfectly still, his back to her, staring at the tree. Dmitri, she called. Dmitri, what's wrong? He turned. His eyes were no longer human. They were yellow, slit-pupilled, gleaming with a cold, predatory light. His mouth stretched into a smile that was too wide, too sharp, too full of teeth. 72 hours, he said, but the voice was not his own. It was a chorus of whispers, a harmony of malice, 1,000 hungry throats speaking as one. You were close, Elena, so close, but you forgot one thing. He stepped toward her, and she saw that his hands were no longer hands. They were claws, black, gleaming, tipped with thorns. The dragons do not come for the body, he hissed. They come for the soul. And your world is so full of hatred, so full of fear, so full of hunger. She backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The vault was sealed. The alarms were silent. She was alone with the thing that had once been Dmitri, and with the black thorn tree that was now reaching for the ceiling, its roots sinking into the concrete, spreading, growing. The seal is broken, the thing that was Dmitri said. Not by me, not by any one act, but by the weight of your sins, your wars, your endless, grinding cruelty. Masha sacrificed everything to hold the gate closed. She gave her fear, her hair, her brother's gift. She bought you 1,000 years. It leaned closer, and its breath smelled of rust and rot. "You wasted them." Elena screamed. She turned and ran, but the vault door would not open. The controls were dead. The lights flickered, dimmed, and died. Only the amber glow of the black thorn remained, casting long, dancing shadows across the walls. She pressed her back against the door, her hands shaking, her breath ragged. And then she saw her reflection. In the polished steel of the vault wall, she saw herself, her face, her hair, her terrified eyes. But there was something wrong. Her pupils were no longer round, they were vertical slits, like the eyes of a reptile, gleaming with a faint golden light. She was changing. She could feel it happening, the scales forming beneath her skin, the hunger coiling in her gut, the ancient, predatory intelligence awakening in her mind. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." But the change was already underway. The gate had not just opened, it had merged. The dragons were no longer coming, they were already here. They were in her. They were in everyone who had ever hated, ever feared, ever clutched their anger like a precious stone. The black thorn tree pulsed, and from its roots a new seedling emerged. Smaller, weaker, but growing. It was not a tree, it was a map. A map of the city, of the world, of every heart that beat with malice. Dmitri, or what had been Dmitri, turned and placed his clawed hand on the seedling. The map blazed with amber light, and 1,000 points flickered to life, one for every act of cruelty happening at that very moment. "Welcome," he said, his voice echoing through the vault, "to the world of dragons." Epilogue. The camera pulls back. It rises through the vault, through the ceiling, through the layers of concrete and steel, until it hovers above the city. Moscow sprawls below, a glittering web of lights and shadows, alive with the hum of human activity. But there is something new in the sky. At first, it is just a trick of the light, a flicker in the corner of the eye, a shadow that moves against the wind. But as the camera zooms in, the truth becomes clear. The sky is full of them. Not clouds, not birds, dragons. Thousands of them, invisible to those who do not believe, visible to those who have already begun to change. They spiral above the city, their wings catching the faint glow of the streetlights, their eyes burning with the same amber hunger that now glows in Elena's pupils. They are not attacking. They are not destroying. They are not even visible to most. They are waiting. The camera pans down to the streets below, where a protest is turning violent. People are shouting, pushing, throwing stones. A window breaks. A fire starts. A child screams. And in the shadows, a shape moves. A young man, his eyes flickering gold, his hands turning to claws. He is not a monster. He is a man. He is every man who has ever let hatred win. The camera pulls back further, into the clouds, into the darkness between stars. And there, at the edge of the world, a voice speaks. The voice of an ancient woman, worn thin by 1,000 years of watching. "I sealed the gate with love and sacrifice. But you, my children, have opened it with hatred and fear. The dragons are not coming for your bodies. They are coming for your souls. They are coming to live inside you, to feed on your anger, to grow fat on your despair. And when the last light of compassion goes out," the voice falters, and a single tear falls through the void. A tear of silver, shimmering like starlight. "Then the feasting shall begin." The screen goes black. The end. Author's note: Anna Gogoleva. Every book is a conversation across time. This one began in the damp earth of the Volobda bogs, where I spent my summers as a child, listening to my grandmother's tales of forest spirits, buried treasures, and the endless, patient breathing of the tiger. She spoke of the old ways, as if they were still alive, still watching, still waiting for the moment when the world would need them again. I did not understand her then. I was young, and the world was bright with the promise of technology, progress, and reason. The spirits of the forest were metaphors, not truths. The dragons were legends, not threats. I am older now. This novel is not, despite its fantastical trappings, a work of pure imagination. Every herb Masha gathers, every incantation she whispers, every ritual she performs is rooted in ethnographic research. In the fragments of pre-Christian Slavic belief that survived the coming of the cross, the centuries of suppression, and the relentless march of secular modernity. I have drawn on the work of scholars such as Vyacheslav Ivanov, Vladimir Toporov, and Boris Rybakov, who reconstructed the cosmology of our ancestors from the scattered bones of folklore, song, and archaeological artifact. The Dove Book is real. The Alatir stone is real. The Skoba Mira, Alatir stone, is real. The Skoba Mira, the brace of the world, appears in the oldest Russian incantations, a cosmic iron spike driven into the earth by Perun himself to hold the fabric of reality together. And the dragons? They are real too. Not as biological creatures, but as what I have called in these pages soul eaters. Manifestations of collective human emotion projected onto the world by our own fear, hatred, and despair. The ancient Slavs did not invent these monsters. They saw them, felt them, and they knew that the only defense against such horrors was not steel or fire, but love, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds of kinship. That is the moral of this story. It is not a subtle one. We are living in 2026 in a world that has forgotten the old ways. We have traded the living breath of the forest for the sterile glow of screens. We have traded community for isolation, hope for cynicism, love for the cold, hungry calculus of power. The news cycles are a litany of cruelty, wars that never end, refugees who never find homes, politicians who speak of compassion while building walls of razor wire. And I wonder, what are we feeding? Every act of hatred, every word of violence, every moment of indifference is a drop of blood in the water of the world. The dragons of old were not slain by swords. They were starved. They fed on fear, and when the people learned to love, the dragons withered. They were driven back into the darkness between stars, there to sleep until the feast returned. I fear the feast is returning. In the final chapters of this book, I wrote of a black thorn tree sprouting from the broken seal, of a scientist whose eyes turned to slits, of a world where the dragons no longer come from outside, but from within. I wrote these scenes in a fever, unable to stop the words from pouring out, and when I finished, I looked at the news. A new war had broken out. Another city was burning. The comment sections of my social media feeds were filled with the kind of cruelty that would make Chernobog himself smile. I am not a prophet. I am a writer. I tell stories to make sense of the world, to find patterns in the chaos, to remind myself, and anyone who reads my words, that there is still a choice. Masha chose love over fear. She chose sacrifice over selfishness. She closed the gate not with power, but with the one thing the dragons could not understand: forgiveness. She forgave her brother for being the key. She forgave Belisar for his weary fatalism. She even forgave Chernobog in the final moment for being what he was, a mirror of humanity's darkest impulses. She did not destroy the mirror. She turned it away. That is the only moral I know how to give. Turn the mirror away. Feed the light. I do not know if we will succeed. The world grows darker with each passing year, and the voices that scream for hatred are so much louder than the whispers of love. But I know this: Masha did not give up. She walked through the salt marshes, faced the three-moored beast, and stood alone at the altar of Perun. She did not win because she was strong. She won because she refused to stop hoping. That is my hope for you, dear reader, that in the quiet moments, when the world seems too heavy and the night too long, you will remember the girl with the severed braid, standing in the center of the vortex, whispering the word of origin into the teeth of annihilation. She is not a myth. She is not a legend. She is the best part of us, the part that still believes, against all evidence, that love can seal the gates of hell. Read this book as a story. I wrote it as a warning. Anna Gogoleva, Summer 2026. Аще род людской перевесит чашу мерзости, разверзнутся врата камня Аллатыря, и приидет судный огонь не по плоти, но по мыслям. If the human race tips the scales of abomination, the gates of the Alatir stone shall open, and the judgment fire shall come, not upon the flesh, but upon the thoughts. Author's rights. Anna Gogoleva, copyright 2026. Copyright notice. Crimson Ash, also titled The Eye of Perun, is an original work of fiction. All rights are reserved by the author, Anna Gogoleva, under the copyright laws of the Russian Federation, the European Union, and international treaties.